Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, April 25th, 2022. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Here are some headlines. Social media giant Twitter has announced it has agreed to sell itself to billionaire businessman Elon Musk in a deal valued at around $44 billion. The deal caps off a whirlwind news cycle that's played out over the past few weeks in which the Tesla and SpaceX CEO became one of Twitter's largest shareholders, was then offered and then turned down a seat on its board, and then followed that with an offer to buy the company. Under the terms of the deal, shareholders will receive $54.20 in cash for each share of Twitter stock they own. That matches Mr. Musk's original offer and marks a 38% premium over the stock's price from nearly a week ago. Mr. Musk said in a statement, quote, "Free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy, and Twitter is the digital town square where matters vital to the future of humanity are debated. Twitter has tremendous potential. I look forward to working with the company and the community of users to unlock it." Twitter independent board chair Bret Taylor called the deal, quote, "the best path forward for Twitter stockholders." The Twitter board conducted a thoughtful and comprehensive process to assess Elon's proposal with a deliberative focus on value, certainty, and financing. The deal, which was unanimously approved by Twitter's board, is expected to close this year. A New York state judge has found former President Trump in contempt of court for not turning over documents after he was court-ordered to comply with a subpoena from the New York Attorney General's office. New York State Supreme Court Judge Arthur Engoron has ordered Mr. Trump to pay $10,000 a day until he shows that he's complied with the order. Earlier this month, New York Attorney General Letitia James asked Judge Engoron to hold the former president in contempt after he blew a deadline for providing the documents. She applauded the ruling on Monday, saying in a statement, quote, "Today, justice prevailed. For years, Donald Trump has tried to evade the law and stop our lawful investigation into him and his company's financial dealings. Today's ruling makes clear no one is above the law." Mr. Trump's attorneys have said they'll appeal the decision. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke to the media today from a secret location in southeastern Poland following their visit to Kyiv to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Secretary Blinken said Russia is failing in its war aims while Ukraine is succeeding. He also announced a gradual return of U.S. diplomats to Ukraine and the nomination of a new ambassador. We'll hear from both men coming up. CNN is reporting that it has obtained more than 2,000 text messages that former Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows sent and received between Election Day 2020 and Inauguration Day 2021. The texts, which Mr. Meadows had selectively provided to the House January 6th committee, come from a range of Trump supporters and show how Mr. Meadows was at the center of the sprawling conspiracy theories that falsely claim the 2020 election was stolen. They also show how he played an important role in the attempts to stop Congress's certification of the election on January 6th. Among the messages sent that day, ex-White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus wrote in all capital letters, "Tell them to go home." South Carolina Representative Republican William Timmons wrote, "The president needs to stop this ASAP." And Georgia Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene wrote, quote, "Mark, I was just told there's an active shooter on the first floor of the Capitol. Please tell the president to calm people. This isn't the way to solve anything." We begin this afternoon in southeast Poland, where Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke to the media from a secret location following their visit to Kyiv and a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Secretary Blinken said that he feels the coordinated effort between the U.S. and its allies to support Ukraine is having real results.
I would say that without putting words in his mouth, President Zelensky expressed deep appreciation for President Biden's leadership and for the incredible generosity and support of the American people. Part of our commitment going forward involves a number of things that I was able to share with President Zelensky yesterday, including the return of American diplomats to Ukraine starting next week, including President Biden's intent to nominate a new ambassador to Ukraine, Ambassador Bridget Brink, currently an ambassador, someone I've served with for a long time, deeply experienced in the region, will be a very strong representative for the United States in Ukraine. And we're seeing that when it comes to Russia's war aims, Russia is failing, Ukraine is succeeding. Russia has sought as its principal aim to totally subjugate Ukraine, to take away its sovereignty, to take away its independence. That has failed. It sought to assert the power of its military and its economy. We, of course, are seeing just the opposite. A military that is dramatically underperforming, an economy as a result of sanctions, as a result of a mass exodus from Russia that is in shambles. And it sought to divide the West and NATO. Of course, we're seeing exactly the opposite. An alliance more divided than I've ever seen it, and indeed, new countries considering applying for membership. The bottom line is this. We don't know how the rest of this war will unfold, but we do know that a sovereign, independent Ukraine will be around a lot longer than Vladimir Putin's on the scene. And our support for Ukraine going forward will continue. It will continue until we see final success.
Secretary of State Tony Blinken. The trip was the highest-level American visit to the region since the Russian invasion began on February 24th. The pair arrived in Poland on separate planes, and U.S. government officials declined to confirm it happened until it was over and the two men were safely out of the country. Defense Secretary Austin said he hopes Russian losses will deter it from repeating its actions elsewhere.
We want to see Ukraine remain a sovereign country, a democratic country able to protect its sovereign territory. We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. So it has already lost a lot of military capability and a lot of its troops, quite frankly. And we want to see them not have the capability to very quickly reproduce that capability. We want to see the international community more united, especially NATO. And we're seeing that. And that's based upon the hard work of, number one, President Biden, but also our allies and partners who have willingly leaned into this with us as we've imposed sanctions, and as we've moved very rapidly to demonstrate that we're going to defend every inch of NATO.
According to the State Department, Secretaries Blinken and Austin also talked with President Zelensky about the $322 million in new aid to Ukraine. According to the State Department, that makes the total U.S. assistance to the country $3.7 billion since the invasion began. Also talking about the visit today was Michigan Republican Peter Meijer, who sits on the House Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security committees.
Congressman, welcome to the show, and give us your take on this meeting and what it really means.
Good morning. With both Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken going to Kyiv, I think this was an overdue but very important thing for the U.S. to be able to show solidarity, show that we are not afraid of sending our officials there, and frankly, that we're not going to let Vladimir Putin dictate where the U.S. can and cannot go. So I give the Biden administration credit for doing so. I wish this would have come sooner, but I think this was a very important show of solidarity. And I'm excited that they're also announcing the plans to return U.S. diplomats more broadly to Kyiv. Now, a lot of our NATO allies never left Kyiv. They did not let Putin scare them away, and we went to Poland, and I understand some of the safety concerns, but I think this is a very important, again, show that the U.S., we are a superpower in this world. We are not going to get pushed around, and we are going to go and support our Ukrainian allies and not let Putin dictate those terms.
Our reporter Jennifer Griffin raised a very important question during the press conference with Secretaries Blinken and Austin. She says that there are photos that show that U.S. weapons are falling into the hands of Russian-backed forces in the Donbass. Really? Is there anything that we could be doing more to prevent this from happening?
And I'd seen similar reports around some British NLAWs, the anti-tank and anti-armor weaponry. This is something that you have to try to work every day to prevent. In a fluid conflict, there's going to be a back and forth. Now, the important thing to remember is that the Ukrainians are fighting from a defensive position. So their main advantage is that they know the terrain. And if you are a defender, you have a far better ability to survive an onslaught if you are even on the weaponry. So some of this weaponry that the Russians are using is antiquated, but some U.S. or some Western aid that is given to the Ukrainian forces or those fighting against the Russians, that is not going to change the overall context of the battle if it shifts from one side to the other. The most important thing is that when the Ukrainians reach back and they need a piece of defensive armament, that they don't come up empty, that they have the support that they need. Because again, the Russians can easily get those supplies in across the borders, except for, we saw some attacks on the oil depots yesterday in interior parts of Russia. We also saw some train lines that have been disrupted, from the very early stages of the conflict, and then some additional train lines that looked to be sabotaged last night. So I think the Ukrainians are showing that they're willing to impact Russian logistical lines, just as the Russians are trying to go after some of the weaponry that's been targeted, that's been transferred from the West to the Ukrainians as well.
Michigan Republican Congressman Peter Meijer earlier today on Fox News. A group of more than 130 House Republicans have sent a letter criticizing Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and questioning his suitability for office. The letter's signers include the top 3 House Republicans, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Whip Steve Scalise, and Conference Chair Elise Stefanik. Its lead signers, Brian Babin of Texas and Republican Study Committee Chair Jim Bank of Indiana, write that the administration's, quote, actions have willingly endangered American citizens, undermine the rule of law, and our nation's sovereignty. The sharp criticism comes amid continued Republican pressure on the Biden administration over its border policies, including the impending end to Title 42, that's the pandemic-era deportation policy, and the largest spike in southern border apprehensions in 2 decades. Here's Republican National Committee Chair Ronna McDaniel talking about the issue on Fox News.
Well, Democrats and the progressive wing and AOC and the squad, they want socialism. They want communism. And a lot of that is why, Harris, we're seeing a huge gain with Hispanic voters coming to the Republican Party. Because you know why? Many of them came to this country legally because they were fleeing countries that had socialism and communism. They know what that means. They understand what those buzzwords are because they felt it in their own lives, and they give up everything to come to this country. And this is frightening because they don't want democracy. They don't want capitalism. They don't want the America we know and love. They want to fundamentally rework it, and that's what the Democrat Party is leaning towards, and that's why it's being rejected by voters, not just Republicans, independents, and Democrats, and the Republican Party is growing at the highest rate ever.
RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel. And late this afternoon, Leader McCarthy speaking to reporters at the Texas border event, but still facing questions about his discussions about President Trump resigning after the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
Well, first of all, let me just answer your question since you don't want to talk about the border. The reporter never asked me that question. The reporter came to me the night before he released the book, and my understanding was he was saying that I asked President Trump to resign. No, I never did, and that's what I was answering. If you're asking now, did I tell my members that we're going to ask them if I told any of them that I said President Trump? The answer is no. Well, I'm glad you asked that question, but what's more important than something that happened 15 months ago on a private conversation with about 4 other people is what's happening here right now.
And here's Press Secretary Jen Psaki, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, talking about the administration's border policy and specifically Title 42.
On the situation at the border and Title 42, Congressman McCall said this weekend that Secretary Mayorkas has expressed some frustration directly to him about how the administration is ending Title 42. He says the Secretary is saying that the Border Patrol, Catholic Charities are already overwhelmed. So has the Secretary raised these concerns with President Biden, and are these concerns that the White House shares?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Title 42 is not an immigration policy or an immigration authority. It's a health authority. So yes, it was coordinated with the Secretary of Homeland Security and through an interagency process. And there's been planning in the works for months for this possibility that the CDC to take this action. Secretary Mayorkas is going to be testifying later this week multiple times. I'm sure he will answer that question and multiple other questions, and I will let him speak for himself. But I would just note that we're continuing to prepare for May 23rd and the implementation, and there is a multi-part strategy that Secretary Mayorkas has been leading and overseeing for the past several months.
Has he raised these concerns with the president?
I'm not going to get into private conversations, but I think, again, it's important to note this is a CDC decision and authority about when we had the health conditions to lift Title 42. It wasn't an indication of an immigration policy.
Do you not believe that there will not be a surge as a result of Title 42 being lifted? did come.
Well, the Department of Homeland Security has projected that there could be an increase in people coming to the border, and that's why they've had a six-part, multi-part plan and proposal and policy they've been implementing for months now to prepare for that.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki at today's White House briefing. And as you heard, Secretary Mayorkas is scheduled to testify before the House Judiciary Committee on Thursday. You can watch that hearing at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN at cspan.org and full coverage on the C-SPAN Now video app. You're listening to Washington Today.
Hey, teachers and high school students. Tune in to Washington Journal Saturday, April 30th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN and C-SPAN Radio. Join the C-SPAN education team and our special guests for our annual Cram for the Exam live call-in program. Review for the upcoming AP U.S. government exam, brush up on your knowledge of civics and the three branches of government, and share your questions with our expert hosts. You definitely do not want to miss this awesome experience. So grab some coffee or tea, a donut or a grapefruit, and find a comfy spot to engage with your friends at C-SPAN and ask your questions and give a shout out to your school. If you have questions, email us at educate@c-span.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Here are some more headlines. 3 German-based wind energy companies have been hit with cyber attacks since Russia began its war in Ukraine. That's according to a Wall Street Journal report. The attacks forced one company to shut down its IT systems. Another said about 2,000 of its wind turbines were down for a day following its cyber attack. The attack comes as many Western European countries are cutting back on imported Russian fuel. Last month, a German wind turbine maker was forced to shut its IT systems following another cyber attack. Conti, a ransomware group that has declared support for the Russian government, claimed responsibility for that attack. President Biden has endorsed incumbent Oregon Democrat Kurt Schrader in his primary against a progressive challenger. In a statement released by the Schrader campaign over the weekend, the president said, quote, "We don't always agree, but when it has mattered most, Kurt has been there for me. And in doing so, he helped pass much of my agenda into law, making a huge difference in the lives of Oregonians he represents and all of America." The announcement marks the first time the president has endorsed a candidate in a primary this election cycle. Representative Schrader is running against Jamie McLeod Skinner in Oregon's 5th District. Representative Schrader is seeking an 8th term. Several wildfires are continuing to wreak havoc in the western U.S. In New Mexico, officials say the Calf Canyon and Hermit's Peak fires have merged and together have burned through more than 54,000 acres east of Santa Fe. The combined fire is only 13% contained and has caused widespread evacuations. In Arizona, evacuation orders have been lifted for areas affected by the Tunnel Fire, which has burned just over 21,000 acres in an area immediately north of Flagstaff. That includes Sunset Crater National Monument. That fire is only 15% contained as of Monday afternoon. The Senate returned today after a 2-week holiday break. On its agenda, spending plans to address pandemic relief and Russia's war in Ukraine, and a bill to support domestic microchip manufacturing. Also, confirming President Biden's picks for federal agencies and courts. Here's Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer during Leader Time.
Today, Madam President, the Senate gavels in for the start of a 5-week work period. And there's much, much that the American people want us and need us to work on in order to lower costs and improve their daily lives. That will be one of our primary focuses. The Senate will also continue confirming President Biden's administrative and judicial nominees. Today, we'll vote to advance the nomination of Lael Brainerd to be Vice Chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Ms. Brainerd received bipartisan backing in the committee, and I expect her to sail through this chamber with similar bipartisan support. As soon as tomorrow, the Senate will proceed on the nomination of Lisa Cook to sit on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Coming from humble beginnings in rural Georgia, where her family fought racial segregation, Ms. Cook would make history as the first black woman ever to sit on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Her qualifications are irrefutable. She's a professor of economics at Michigan State, a member of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago Advisory Board, and served as senior economist in the President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. In short, Ms. Cook absolutely belongs on the Fed, and I look forward to the Senate confirming her soon. This week, the Senate will also confirm Alvaro Bedoya as a commissioner on the Federal Trade Commission, breaking a 2-2 deadlock on the FTC that has lasted for over a year. Mr. Bedoya's confirmation is truly significant. If we want to lower costs, if we want to understand why the price of things like gasoline have surged, then it's important to break the 2-2 deadlock at the FTC so it can fully examine these issues and execute its agenda. Every time Americans go to the pump, they just know something truly rotten is going on with America's energy sector. Last year, the top 25 oil and gas companies reported $205 billion in profits. Earlier this month, ExxonMobil alone reported its highest quarterly profits since 2008. But has any of this translated into lower prices for Americans? Has any of this gone to help resolve our energy challenges? Has any of it gone to increasing worker productivity? No, no, and no.
Democratic and Republican leaders on both the House and Senate Appropriations Committees are scheduled to meet this week to talk about top-line numbers on fiscal 2023 domestic and defense spending. Both sides also named conferees to hammer out a final deal on a bill to boost domestic manufacturing and are hoping to hash out a compromise to lower out-of-pocket costs for insulin. Here's more Leader Time remarks from Republican leader Mitch McConnell.
Now, Madam President, on an entirely different matter, the Senate reconvenes today after Passover and Easter to begin a new work period. But unfortunately, the biggest problem facing the American people is still the same as it has been all year long. Rising inflation is continuing to inflict painful consequences on working families across our country. This painful problem isn't getting better. It's still getting worse. Last month, consumer prices clocked an 8.5% year-on-year increase. Inflation is now rising at its fastest pace in more than 4 decades. The surge is being led in large part by a 23.6% jump in airfares, a 35.3% increase in used car and truck prices, and a 48% spike in the cost of gasoline. These are exactly the sort of products consumers lean on most heavily in the warmer months. But while March's numbers are an extra cruel twist, the American people have been feeling the effects of the Biden administration's war on domestic energy for the better part of a year. Before most folks even began to consider summer travel, and long before Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine, working families were already facing soaring prices at the gas pump. Even as wage growth accelerated for a 5th straight month, workers' paychecks once again failed to keep pace with the steep surge of rising prices. Raises and bonuses are being swallowed by inflation. Real wages are down 2.7% year on year. Democrats' runaway spending has brought us runaway inflation. Prices in the U.S. have risen higher and faster than in other developed economies.
Remember, you can always find the Senate when it is in session on C-SPAN 2. And for more on the week ahead in Congress, here's Ebony McMorris, White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Network, and Nicholas Wu, congressional reporter for Politico.
It's going to be a huge week. First, let me even pivot a little bit back because over the weekend we saw Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin traveling to Kyiv and meeting with Zelensky. And so in that travel, what we know is coming out of that, before we can get to what the president is going to do, is that number one, they're going to start sending diplomats back to into the area. And we're a little bit behind other places that have already done that. Not only that, we're also going to see more money. We've put more money into some of the fighting that is going to be going on there. And also now an ambassador is going to be assigned to the area. And so to reestablish diplomatic presence. And so Bridget Brink, we're going to see come back. Now in the White House, we're going to see the president also go before Congress. And he's going to ask for more money in the supplemental budget. One thing that I want us to look to see is if that's going to be connected to COVID relief money. That's where the kink is going to be when we talk about what the White House is going to do, because we saw what happened with COVID relief and immigration policies. There was, it didn't go through because of that issue. And so there's been a press for that. But there are also things that people have been asking for. Congressman Portman has talked about whether or not putting forth legislation so that the U.S. can use, the Biden administration can use some of the assets that have been seized. So there's a lot of things weighing on the table. So far, the Pentagon said about $3.7 billion has already gone towards funding the fight in Ukraine.
And so, Nicholas Wu, then turning it over to the congressional side, you heard about the request coming from the president. What's the reception level there on Capitol Hill?
Well, the reception level for Ukraine aid has been generally positive and bipartisan throughout the course of the war. You've seen Ukraine-related aid sail through both chambers with bipartisan majorities. Now, the fly in the ointment here is really what exactly gets attached to the Ukraine aid. Like Ebony was saying, like if coronavirus aid ends up being attached to this legislation, if there's other things that Republican legislators want to attach to COVID aid, if at some point you start to see progressive lawmakers balk at sending more weapons into war, then this could start to get tricky. But at least for now, leaders in both chambers have vowed to take up this supplemental funding as soon as Biden makes the formal request. And so we'll have to wait and see how that turns out in the next week or so.
And while we're talking, let's remind people quick about the COVID aid. This was an issue with the White House leading up. Remind people what the president asked for, what Congress actually did with that request.
The president asked for about $10 billion in COVID-related funding for treatments and therapeutics because funding was starting to run out in the last several months. Now, this was supposed to be attached to a larger government funding bill, but Democrats mostly revolted over the fact that money was going to be reallocated from other coronavirus-related aid for states. And so this left the White House between a rock and a hard place here because they needed this money, but there wasn't a way to get it through because Democrats didn't like the way it was funded, and Republicans would only accept that one funding source. And so now there's a standalone bill that's being drafted to try to get this funding through, but Republicans in the Senate want to attach immigration-related provisions to it. And that is something that, if it does pass the Senate, might not actually pass the House. And so, this still brings us back to the central problem of getting this through.
Ebony McMorrison, the White House's call for this money, and add on to that.
Yeah, so even in the briefing room a couple of weeks ago, the big question was coming from some of the reporters is that how are you even tracing some of the money that the states are getting? There was a pushback. There were several articles on some of the money was being used even by police force, which the president said could be used for that reason. But some felt like some of the drones that were being brought in was that too much, and so people are trying to see how are we going to trace the money that's going out to these states, what's going to happen there. And so it's almost like the perfect storm. So we're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with Ukraine, and then we're also getting the assurance from the president and other allies saying that the president is going to stick with Ukrainians on this. The question is, how long is this haul? We've already put in $3.7 billion, and the Americans through polling of saying, we're going to stick through this with you. But then when we turn back and look at COVID, gas prices, inflation, how long will you hear that same song from the American people?
Ebony McMorris, White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Network, and Nicholas Wu, Politico's congressional reporter, on this morning's Washington Journal. You can see more at cspan.org/WJ and on the C-SPAN Now video app. A year after being hospitalized with COVID-19, only about 25% of people feel fully recovered. That's according to a new study, and the risk of long COVID was the highest among women, people who are obese, and those who were on a ventilator. That's all according to a new study released today in Europe in the Lancet Respiratory Medicine Journal. Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine, who contracted COVID-19 and suffers long-term effects of it, spoke with the Washington Post today about the ongoing research into the effects of long COVID and his legislation addressing the issue.
What kinds of symptoms are we talking about when we talk about long COVID? And what's the range, and how big a health problem is this?
Francis, you started off with two of the tough questions. The range is broad, and the scope of the problem we're still trying to determine. So let me tackle scope, and then I'll tackle the range of symptoms. So the estimates that I'm seeing suggest that anywhere between 5 and 30% of people who get COVID could have persistent long COVID symptoms. Now, obviously, that is a very broad range. The numbers I've seen in the United States suggest that about 80 million people have been diagnosed with COVID, but many were never diagnosed. They got COVID before there was testing, for example. So it's in all likelihood the number of Americans who've had COVID is in excess of 100 million. So it could be 5 million long COVID sufferers, it could be 30 million, and we still have to do more to really figure that out. And then the second issue that you asked is, well, what are the symptoms? And they come into different buckets. So there's neurological symptoms. I have a nerve tingling sensation that kicked in right when I got COVID in March of 2020 and has never gone away. Others have a loss of taste or smell or a light sensitivity. So it's a vision issue or tinnitus, ringing in their ear. These all seem kind of related. There's probably nothing wrong with my skin or somebody else's taste buds, but the way the brain interprets sense data kind of gets scrambled a little bit. There's respiratory conditions that some people have. These are very serious. People who have had no past history of heart issues find that their heart rates race up and down in random and troubling ways. Pulmonary and respiratory problems are pretty common. People who got the respiratory form of COVID and they don't ever feel like they've really been able to come back to a place where they're not short of breath. And then intense fatigue, people who are 10K or marathon runners who now have a hard time walking around the block without getting too tired. I visited with some long COVID patients in Appalachian, Virginia last week and heard stories about this intense fatigue. There are other symptoms as well, but what they tell us is that just as COVID is kind of a multi-system attacker, long COVID also can just manifest itself in very, very different ways among different people.
Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine speaking with the Washington Post. You can see more from that event at cspan.org and also on the free C-SPAN Now video app. And we end today with Fran Drescher, the actress best known for her TV sitcom The Nanny, is the new president of the Screen Actors Guild. And at an event at the National Press Club, the 64-year-old talked about her environmental activism, healthcare, and her rise to a leadership post at SAG-AFTRA following a contentious campaign between her and fellow actor and Golden Globe nominee Matthew Modine.
Well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You won a relatively close and sometimes contentious contest to lead SAG-AFTRA. Your Secretary-Treasurer, Julie Fisher, was elected from the opposing ticket. When you won, you said you wanted to win over the support of members who didn't vote for you. What have you been doing in the nearly 8 months since your election to accomplish that?
I have to say that I get some very pleasant emails from people that I know did not vote for me. I think that and some of my peers from the union here, I did forewarn them that I'm probably more radical than they might expect me to be. And I came in not having any preconceived notions about who anybody was. So I had no built-in prejudice towards anybody. I will listen to what they have to say, and whoever it's coming from, and I don't know who the hell they are, but I may agree with them. I may, respectfully disagree with them. But I feel like it was a really healthy thing that I ended up winning this election, because I feel like I straddled the fence more successfully because I happen to agree with both sides of the coin on a lot of different issues. And so people that felt shut out or marginalized or unheard, might have been frustrated, no longer are. So I think I'm succeeding in uniting us as a member body. And I think that if I can accomplish that during my tenure, that will be a great achievement, and I will be very proud that that has happened. And I do see us moving towards each other instead of away.
New Screen Actors Guild President Fran Drescher, along with National Press Club President Jen Judson. You can see this entire event at cspan.org. It's also on our C-SPAN Now video app. And a reminder that this program is available as a podcast. You can find it at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington, delivered daily right to your inbox, you can subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Tuesday morning, Hannah Wesolowski, Chief Advocacy Officer of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, discusses federal efforts to improve mental health programs in the U.S. And we'll look at the U.S. and NATO response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine with Vermont Democratic Congressman Peter Welch. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets.